Hey everybody, welcome back to Community of Writers. I'm Anthony Sovak, and with me today is Molly McCloy. Molly is a Moth StorySLAM Winner, story coach, keynote speaker. She's a 4-time Moth StorySLAM Winner. Sorry for that. I didn't want to demote you. Your work was recently featured, profiled in O Magazine. You hold an MFA in nonfiction from the creative nonfiction from the New School, facilitated story workshops for Pima Community College, Quest Storytelling, and the University of Arizona, as well as other places. Some upcoming work. I'm told you're going to the Moth Grand Slam. I'm going to ask you about that in a second.
Okay.
And doing some work with the National Organization of Women. And in January 24th and 25th of 2020, you're doing a workshop called The Power of Storytelling with Karen Olson.
Yes.
So that's a lot of stuff to cover right there. But I guess my first question is, at what point did you realize I'm a storyteller? That's a thing.
Ah, interesting. I think, I think it was after I won 3 Moth Slams.
Nice. Good answer.
Yeah. I initially was getting a creative nonfiction degree at the New School, as you said, and my instructor said, hey, there's this thing in town, because we were in New York. He said, there's this thing called the Moth. If you're doing nonfiction, you should go try it out. And I was very surprised to learn that it was storytelling with no notes and no reading, and that I'd have to just get up and tell my story. And the first time was kind of rough, and then I think the second one I won. And then I was doing that for a while and still kind of considering that as being a promotional tool. And then eventually came back to Arizona and got a gig up at Scottsdale Center for the Arts through a woman named Tiny Catan, and told the story in front of 800 people, I think. And then I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing, I think,
Right. And so, I guess what interests me about I'm a storyteller is that it seems a whole lot less pretentious than, say, I'm a poet, right? Or I'm a more formal writer. It seems a little more accessible in a way, but when you describe it now in front of 800 people, it sounds way scarier.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I maybe the turnaround for me was actually when I started to realize that I actually enjoyed it, because I think there was this thing before that, this sort of idea that I was a writer and this was something that I had to do, and that it was painful and difficult, and I was nervous. And then I did my one-woman show in New York, and my director started coaching me on going in high energy, and I realized, if I set my intention that I really like being up here, it changes the whole dynamic, and it changes everything, and it's so much more enjoyable and so much more fun, and I'm so much better at it, So it was interesting to me that for so long, it was even after winning like 2 Moth Slams, that I sort of hung on to this idea that I didn't like being up there. So yeah, that there was kind of this shift that had to happen.
That's interesting. We talked a little bit today in one of our meetings about the labor of writing and labor is suffering, but how do you see your work as a writer, as a comic, as a storyteller? How do you see that intersecting?
Well, yeah, I feel like I'm bouncing back and forth between the forms a lot. Like I'm working on a memoir right now, and so I'm pulling stories out of the memoir to go tell live. And they definitely have to be pared down a lot and put into kind of a spoken language. And even there are certain storytelling shows where you can read, but even those shows, I changed the text quite a bit to make it sound spoken, to make it sound conversational. So there's a different expectation, whereas writing, the expectation is for detail and attention to sort of a literary style that's a little more lyrical. And then for the storytelling, it really should just sound like I'm talking to my friends. Mm-hmm. And it's always surprising to me, like, how different that diction is.
Yeah.
Between the two.
Yeah. And as a comic, as long as you're making them laugh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, which is harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
I feel like the expectation for comedy is higher because the laughs have to come every 30 seconds, which in storytelling, it's like, oh, you could carry it along with the story and people are delighted if it's funny. But in comedy, yeah, it's like the basic time frame is like you got to get a laugh every 30 seconds, which is kind of tough.
Yeah. And you do notice these narrative arcs that comics have, whatever they call it, the tight 5, tight 10, you got a good, you're following everyone along. And I saw you, and I think it was at the, was it the female storytellers?
Yeah, I think so too.
And it was, Eric and I were running down, we got in late and we couldn't even get in the door. There were so many people and we watched you, from the fly, but the whole room was laughing. I mean, it was just this kind of, you were a bard up there, and you had them all going. And I was wondering, if there's any stories that maybe you'd like to tell us or anything that comes to mind based on the questions we've been asking for your audience of the world.
I didn't consider the fact that I might tell a story today. So, that there are certain stories that I kind of have in my head pretty good that I could sort of tell, or I could tell sort of an off-the-cuff story. Okay, here's a Pima story. It's not set up and It's not designed, but I'll just kind of tell you a nice little Pima story. So I arranged a storytelling competition up at the Northwest campus, and it was pretty fun. We had David Fitzsimmons come curate it. We had people from female storytellers, etc. And we had a student, his story was about a testicular medical problem. So it had some humor in it, a little bit of darkness. It was kind of a serious story too. Anyway, so, oh boy. I'm just kind of ramble through this one apparently. Anyway, so he won the contest, which was cool. And then we go up to, Rebecca and I, my wife Rebecca and I travel up to New York City just to go hang out in the city. And I realize there's a Moth SLAM while I'm there. I'm going to go to the Moth SLAM. We're at the museum that day, and I hear my name called behind me. And I think it's going to be one of my old friends from New York. And no, it's this kid that won the slam that we did for Pima in New York out of nowhere. He's like, yeah, I'm a comic. I just moved to New York. And I said, well, you should come do the Moth SLAM with me. And he said, oh, don't you have to sign up for that? I'm like, no, man, you just sign up that night. So we all go to this Moth SLAM. It's completely crowded. And he gets pulled 9th. They pull his name, which is amazing in the first place. He gets up and tells his story, gets really good scores. And then he reaches around and pulls my name out of the hat. And I get pulled 10th. And I got up and won it, but I guess in a way that's like, I don't know. I'm not telling the story just as self-aggrandizement,
No.
But it was just kind of great to do storytelling down here at Pima Community College, and then run into a student all the way in New York, and then we both got to do the Moth together, which was really cool.
Yeah, no, that sounds rad actually to me in terms of, here we are in Tucson, and you tend to think, I spent a lot of time in New York. I grew up there. Good 30 years getting educated. I feel like I've been to more creative writing stuff out here than I ever could out there because I couldn't afford any of it when I was there. And there's just so many writers in the desert, and I'm always surprised at how many of them are, always heading back to the East Coast.
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
true.
But you're involved in quite a lot of community projects. So maybe you could tell us some of your favorite or some of the most memorable in terms of what's going on locally for our students.
If students are 21 or over, or if they can show up with a parent, female storytellers is really great. That tends to be at a bar. The venue on that might change, but that's all female storytellers, and it's no notes. Actually, no, you can have notes you can read at female storytellers, and it tends to be like a young, kind of raucous crowd, as you saw when you came to the show. And then there's Odyssey storytelling, where you can't have notes and you have to just tell the story, and that's co-ed, and that's another good organization. And those are the two that I do in town.
Yeah, I like this idea too. You've done different kinds of workshops to help people feel comfortable storytelling. And, and even you are an experienced storyteller. I'm like, hey, tell us a story. I didn't set anything up, right? And there's different values. You say you're doing the power of storytelling with Karen Olson, but you've also gone to, larger organizations to talk to people's employees to get them to connect, to be better at presenting by connecting in a sort of authentic way, if I'm doing that, if I'm summarizing that correctly. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that work.
Yeah, I think there's this hunger for authenticity and human stories right now. Probably, there's lots of theories, but probably because of automation and constant screen time. But people are really interested in getting in a room and listening to a live true story from somebody else, just on a kind of entertainment level and kind of a community level. Like Odyssey will do community announcements too, and it's really got this Tucson feel to it. So there's that piece of it. And then I did a webinar for 380 accountants actually logged onto my webinar, which was kind of cool. So I did a webinar for accountants on public speaking, on how to put a story together for public speaking that you might have to do for accounting. And we actually modeled the story with my friend who was an accountant. And then I've done a few nonprofit workshops where the idea is instead of doing like a written grant report, actually be able to tell a live story to your funders about what your nonprofit organization was doing. And people seem to really like getting some guidance on how to get up and tell a story out loud to other people. And I think it is just this hunger for connection and community and authenticity that's really sort of big right now.
Well, what's interesting to me, and I'm going to connect this to Dungeons & Dragons, sorry guys, but Dungeons & Dragons is huge now. Because I think in part because the people just kind of want to say, I want to sit together with the 5 people I know instead of 5,000 I don't, and have this connection here.
And the younger generation seems to be super into game nights.
Yeah, but there's something almost therapeutic about that, right? And I think that's what's what this workshop with Karen Olson is going to explore a little bit. Am I right? Yeah.
We chose a campfire image for the advertising because that was the thought of just, having people telling stories in an intimate space. And, I've been teaching writing with the idea of you might be published someday or how to get through school. And I've been teaching storytelling with the idea of, hey, maybe you can win a Moth SLAM. What I discovered, what I really wanted to start doing, which is the reason that I partnered up with Karen Olson, who's a local therapist, is I wanted to start teaching people storytelling that makes you feel good. That's kind of an empowerment thing. And what I started realizing when I was taking a look at all the workshops that I've already been doing is that a lot of the things that are good about story structure are also good about personal empowerment. So, for example, you don't want the passive narrator that just has things happen to him or her. You want a narrator that's actually going after something and trying to get something. And if you go back into your own personal life stories and find that part of yourself in those stories, the sort of part of yourself that has empowerment and agency, then not only is your story going to be good, but you're going to feel a lot better about your story. So it's interesting to me like how easily the elements of good narrative and good storytelling line up with empowerment and well-being. And I've wanted to explore this for a long time, and I'm pretty excited to be doing the workshop in January. Yeah, no, it sounds awesome. It sounds like you're looking back and providing a framework on your own experience, right, to sort of set yourself up. Yeah, exactly. And I've been realizing like how much of my own stuff is taking super traumatic things in my life and making them funny a lot of the time. But I also want to kind of figure out how to make them dramatic when they're supposed to be dramatic too, because I have a tendency maybe to go a little too far with making stuff funny that maybe shouldn't be in some cases, and kind of trying to get that tone right. One of my stories is about when my house got burglarized in 2000, and I'm actually, if I'm totally honest, I'm still feeling that trauma a little bit. Like right after it happened, I was sleepwalking, and I'm not sleepwalking anymore, but every once in a while something weird will happen at night that I know is related to that. But I got a really nice, funny story out of it because right after I got burglarized, we went camping with naked hippies, so who were all robbing each other and claiming they lived in a utopia. So, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I have a fair amount of experience of taking stuff that's traumatic and making it funny. And what I'm starting to work harder is taking stuff that was traumatic and making it dramatic when it needs to be, and kind of playing with tone and doing those things. So I think it's hopefully going to lend itself pretty naturally to helping people go back to their old stories and figuring out, as you're saying, sort of a framework for me. Even doing the one-woman show, it's sort of a framework for being able to handle the emotional content, to being able to put it in a place where it's not so hot to the touch anymore, you know?
So, thank you so much for salvaging this interview. And it's a new space and everybody, so it's just kind of wigging me out, and I can hear myself in the headphones, so that's throwing me off a little bit. But I guess just to sort of wrap up, if Molly now can go back to Molly before you first got on the stage, what sort of advice would you have for yourself then?
Oh, that's a fun question. To have fun with it, I think, to just like loosen up and have some fun with it, because I kind of took the long way around to figuring that out for sure.
Yeah. That's really good advice all the time.
Yeah, right? If you could just get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys want to have fun with Molly and the female storytellers, come down. Even, I was not telling stories, but I was having fun listening to stories, and so that's great too. And some of the other community events that Molly has shared with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony.